Reboot your credit card with Apple Card, the only credit card designed for iPhone. It gives you up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase. Plus, Apple Card has no fees, not even hidden ones. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Subject to credit approval. Variable APRs for Apple Card range from 19.24% to 29.49% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of February 1st, 2024. Terms and more at applecard.com. Hello and welcome to Navel Gazing. I'm John Dickerson. Notebook 75, page 12, September 2021. Notebooks to Garret. Well, we started this episode right away, didn't we? Notebook entry right away. No preliminaries, no throat clearing, no self-indulgent jokes about the Greeks, no rumination on the start of things, just a brisk plunge into the icy waters of recollection. In this notebook of our present concern, yellow-covered field notes held together by blue painter's tape, there was, you'll remember from the last episode, a to-do list. This occasioned a conversation about the to-do list and its role in ordering or tousling the hair of our modern life. Next in the notebook, it contains another long to-do list, but this one is specifically related to the tasks of the apartment move across town. The very top entry is this one, Notebooks to Garret. Its placement befits the priority that specific task had. Garret is the name I gave to my office in the attic of our new house, where I am coming to you now over the wireless. I say I gave it that name. A more precise description is that over time, as I nested in the cell, I learned how fitting that name is for this place. I give you Wikipedia. A garret is a habitable attic, a living space at the top of a house, traditionally small with sloping ceilings. In the days before elevators, this was the least prestigious position in the building, at the very top of the stairs. And verily, the garret is what you reach when you walk all the way up our stairway. It is on the fourth floor of our house, which still lives in the days before elevators. The final flight you climb is so narrow, we had to dismantle the furniture to get it through the door, reassemble it once we'd squeezed it through the tiny little opening. In our old apartment that initiated this podcast journey, which you have found lightly beneficial to your equilibrium, we did have an elevator, which was a great benefit in moving the castle of boxes down into the moving van. In that procession of items to go a-moving, one box stood apart, one box upon which the movers were not to lay their efficient hands. It was marked with a large X of painter's tape. You might have thought from the bright red warning that it contained biological material, like the boxes outside the doctor's office door waiting to have the hemoglobin picked up by the lab. There were actually two of such boxes. Anne had one as well. Hers contained our wedding negatives. Very important to remember how many years have passed since we were those fresh-faced kids. You wouldn't want that one lost in the move. Every move loses a box. It's physics or something. I'm surprised there isn't a German or Nordic custom where you pack a box full of trash as a sacrificial tribute to the box-losing gods, so that the worthless box is the one that gets lost and not the one with your toothbrush and your wedding photographs. My red box contained the notebooks. Anne and I had inadvertently answered the vital parlor game question: if your house catches on fire, what one thing would you rush out of the building? Ours would be our red boxes. The cover of my box read, "Do Note Move." I believe I meant "Do Not Move." This was confirmed by a subsequent entry in the notebook, which reflects on the fact that I wrote, "Do Note Move." Notebook 75, page 13, September 2021. Can you make a typo with handwriting? What's a typo with handwriting called? Do Note Move. It has a surprise elegance because it's both a message for me and a note for the movers. Who needed the guidance more, me to move the notebooks, do note move, or do not move? The message to the movers to not move the notebooks. I think in this topsy-turvy world, we all need as much guidance as possible. Psychologists studying the connection between place and memory say if you leave a room to go do something, and then when you get to wherever you were going, you forget what it was that you wanted to do in the first place, go return to the room where you had the original impulse. The setting will help you remember your intent. Is memory a perky stenographer ready to take new impressions right away? Are the recollections sharper at the start, like the first days visiting a new city, where you fall in love with a humble postbox because it's so unfamiliar? When I think of the move in that fall of 2021, in this memory exercise that is this podcast, the two items that come quickly to my mind, without looking back at what I might actually have written in the notebooks, the two items that come most quickly to mind are orange carpet and eulogies. As a side note, can we have an orange carpet at my funeral when hopefully someone is offering a eulogy? Is someone taking notes? Can we make that happen? Why is orange carpet on my mind? The carpet in our townhouse is traffic cone orange, and it runs from the entrance floor up the stairs all the way to the garret, where it covers the floor of the two tiny rooms where I nest, and where I beat my heels in tiny laps of consideration as I pace and write this. It is under my feet as I type this in stocking feet on a cold day and speak it, wearing shoes because it's still cold up here. Our landlord picked the carpet. He lives in Milan, Italy, and to give you a sense of just how orange the carpet is, he can see it from across the Atlantic Ocean. The floor covering choice represents the entire vibe of biscotti and espresso that I ascribe to him because I'm a sucker for all things Italian, and because when he comes to visit, he brings a bottle of Prosecco, which, along with my Italian friends, confirms to me that they have something figured out about living that I never will. You confront the carpet the minute you walk in. Well, it confronts you. Our aesthetic sync with our Italian landlord's taste in carpeting helped us win the Hunger Games competition to become tenants in the apartment. That and the trident we used to drive the competitors from District Tribeca to a clattering early grave. But our story of this episode, which feels like it's going to be about the containers we wrap ourselves in, begins before we secured our new location. In the spring of 2021, we learned our previous landlord was putting the apartment up for sale. His real estate team came into our lives not long after this. In New York suits, they rushed us out of our house and paraded swells looking at the apartment through our lives. You've never experienced the fullness of the expression, ask for forgiveness rather than permission, than when you're on the wrong end of a New York real estate transaction. The agents working for the landlord trying to make the big sale did not, how shall I put this, have our interests at heart. Oh, is that your mother in the wheelchair we pushed down the back stairs? I'm so sorry. We wanted to show the Richardsons the closet where they could put their technology stack. Iodine, I hear, can be helpful with lacerations. The sale also put us back into the market after a 3-year respite. The competition in the spring of 2021 was fierce. The COVID-19 pandemic was in a pause, and New Yorkers were swinging their vaccinated arms to elbow each other out of available rental apartments. Pent-up demand was unpenting. Renters were signing contracts on apartments without even seeing them in person. They'd stared, dead-eyed, into Zillow late at night like the rest of us, and gotten an itch to be an influencer in their own life, to live dramatic scenes in that new place. On some properties, renters were offering to pay more in monthly rent than the owners were asking. We did none of this, and our high-minded affection for the contents of our bank account resulted in losing repeatedly in the competition. 30 years ago, nearly to the day, I looked for my first apartment in New York. Today's apartment hunter strains the ocular nerves peering into Zillow. Oh, here's a good one. Wait a minute, why are there no pictures of the kitchen? Is that a hazmat suit hanging in the mudroom? In 1991, the fresh-faced college graduate weakened his eyes, tweezing meaning out of the tiny boxes stacked on the vast grid of classified advertisements in the newspaper. Today, we live in an age of information abundance, but at the end of the 20th century, letters cost you money. Words cost you. Space in the newspaper was pricey. So owners abbreviated their rental descriptions to use as few letters as possible to convey information. To the modern ear, imagine your most annoying friend who texts you using shortcuts for every word. The letter U for you, TKS for thanks. Nothing delivers a blast of gratitude more directly than being too lazy to tap out the entire words thank you. Large bedrooms in these advertisements were LRGBR. I couldn't afford any of those in 1991. I also couldn't swing a WBF, that's a wood-burning fireplace, or an LNDR, laundry. If you could balance a cereal bowl in your palm while spooning your soggy cornflakes at the open refrigerator door, you were standing in an EIK. That's an eat-in kitchen. The ads did not splurge even for a period to accompany the abbreviations. Since you could not look up answers to your most pressing questions on your computer, there was no Google, the internet was just for the Pentagon. If you wished to learn something, you had to ask a person what some of the more obscure notations meant. This required admitting ignorance, which at age 23 I'd planned on not doing until I had the chance of sounding charming in my recollections 30 years later in a self-referential podcast. Soon I acquired the first of the New York senses, the ability to tease meaning out of the words between the occult symbols in the newspaper, to tell when an apartment advertised was too good to be true. If an apartment was a must-see, you'd discover it was over a tire shop. Or it might have an EIK, an eat-in kitchen, with only an outlet for a hot plate. Any apartment that was truly a must-see didn't have to spend money shouting about it in the newspaper. It had already been rented. What you learned from these tiny little advertisements in the classifieds was that New York is essentially a constant battle to learn the meaning behind the apparent meaning of things. This, too, is, of course, journalism, art, writing. Everything I seem to do requires this skill. Only the sunshine in the morning on your face means exactly what it means, and no more. The notebook from this early period of apartment hunting contains phone numbers written on the diagonal across the page in haste, names of building managers, not entire names, just first names. These transactions to see apartments were the bare minimum of human contact. I wasn't renting anything expensive enough to warrant any much more. Sometimes you'd just get the name of the superintendent of the building. You'd show up. He'd expend a crouton's worth of energy, motioning you to the apartment. You shouldered your way in past the coroner's men removing the body and begin the process of trying to convince yourself that you could make do in this space. The difference between apartment hunting in 1991 and 2021 is that in the early days, you were game to fit yourself in apartments that might not be just right. You put your imagination to work towards figuring out how you could live there, coming up with convincing reasons it would be fine to live next to a groaning elevator. In later years, the imagination worked against you. During the apartment panic of 2021, we had let our Zillow filter collapse. We needed a place to live, so we were anxious. We visited many spaces that elicited a powerful emotional reaction. If you are a person of high imagination, as I am, you walk into a new space and the receptors in the brain flood with plays, operas, ballets, one-act dinner theater productions, shadow puppets of how your life in that location will unfold. The prefrontal cortex is no use to you in these instances, controlling your wild surmise, which means when you see the basement master bedroom with a candle's worth of natural light, you shudder as if you've been condemned to live there. Your nostrils take in the mildew and the sadness of the curling linoleum kitchen floor tiles, and your brain does not know what to do with itself. During these rounds of visits, Anne, who is more polite and generally well-adjusted than I am, would give the game a few more rounds of her bright imagination and offer really helpful suggestions about how we might live in this new space, as if we were on vacation with the family and we just had to make the best of it. Maybe the glowing radon rock in the basement could keep the tea warm if you rested your cup on it. I, on the other hand, had the welder's mask on and was trying to burn through the bars covering the window and make my gasping escape out into the sweet streets of the city. Mr. Dickerson, the door's open. You can just walk out of it. In 1991, I was not such a gentle flower. I was just lucky to have a place to put my head, a mindset affirmed by the map of my room in the apartment where I ultimately chose to put my head. An apartment that was so small it could accommodate only my head. The map of my room in the blue Smythson leather-bound notebook number 3 shows that it was 90 square feet, 10 by 9. I measured 23.5 inches between the bathroom and the air conditioner socket, 18 inches between the door and the wall. I had room for my bed and the particle board door I used as a desk. You might think that a room that has access to a bathroom suggests a certain largesse of accommodation. The bathroom was no bigger than an airplane bathroom, and because my room was the size of a walk-in closet, I dare not eat an extra burrito, for I could not open the door to the bathroom but a sliver, and I had to slide in. The door could not complete the sweep because it would hit the bed, so you had to shimmy into the bathroom. So I had a walk-in closet with a shimmy-in bathroom, or as they say in the papers, a WIC with an SIB. This episode is brought to you by Home Chef. One of the things I've realized about Home Chef, in addition to the fact that everything comes in these neat, tidy packets, all pre-chopped, arranged, with really clear instructions, a nice little booklet to put the instructions in, is that the brain share that is saved by having this all ready and there for you for the coming week, and knowing that it's going to be tidy and arranged, steals from you the angst of what are we going to eat and the mental weight of thinking like, what are we going to have for dinner? What do we have in the fridge? What are we going to go buy? Can we make it by the market? Taken care of. We've had sweet chili pork lettuce wraps, which were really delicious. And also, if you're not sure about vegetables in your life, there they are. Nice, tidy vegetables in there. It's not just food that's delicious, but it's also healthy. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering listeners 18 free meals plus free shipping on your first box and free dessert for life at homechef.com/navel. That's homechef.com/navel for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. homechef.com/navel. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. This episode is brought to you by Audible, the destination for thrilling audio entertainment. I've recently been thrilled by a novel by David Archer and Vince Vogel, and it's called A Burden of the Assassin. And I realized as I was listening to it, which is I listen to it around the house when I'm on my morning walk if Anne isn't here. It is so much fun to be in the grip of genre when it's like galloping along. Last night, I was listening to it as I was going to bed, and usually I fall off to sleep pretty quickly. But in this case, I was listening all the way up to the moment that the sleep timer goes off after 15 seconds. And it was right at the moment, like one of the things was happening. And I had to wake up to press it and listen to what was going to happen next, which is a good sign of a galloping genre novel, if I've ever heard one. Audible members can keep one title a month from the entire catalog. New members can try Audible now free for 30 days. Visit audible.com navel-gazing or text navel-gazing to 500-500. That's audible.com/navel-gazing or text navel-gazing to 500-500 to try Audible free for 30 days. Navel-gazing is sponsored by Field Notes, as you know. My most recent Field Notes practice is that I've been resisting touching my phone until 10 a.m. if I can stand it. Texts are accepted. And so instead, my morning is based around my Field Notes and planning for the day and having it in the coffee shop while we have our morning coffee. And it is the perfect companion to a slow, long-looking morning. And I'm totally enjoying it. And now that it's part of the beginning of my day, I have been cured of the not going back and looking at the notebook for 30 years. So if you want to make a Field Notes notebook a part of your morning routine, visit fieldnotesbrand.com and save 10% on your first order by using the coupon code GAZING. Can't wait for next week's episode? Listen to it now. Immediately unlock the next episode of Navel Gazing by subscribing to Slate Plus. Your subscription also gets you ad-free listening across all your favorite Slate podcasts, plus a weekly member-exclusive segment on the Political Gabfest. Join now by clicking subscribe at the top of the Navel Gazing show page on Apple Podcasts, or visit slate.com/navelgazingplus to get access wherever you listen. The garret from which I join you now is 12 by 7, so I'm coming to you from a hobbit hole of essentially the same size. This 1991 apartment was one in which I lived with two friends from college. It was a duplex at the top of a narrow 5-floor apartment building. A duplex sounds roomy, but since my room was just an adjunct to the only other upstairs room, I'd have to pass through my roommate's room to get downstairs. This was not sustainable. So to get to the shower or the kitchen, which were downstairs, I had to go outside of my roomlet, walk down the general staircase for all apartments. Oh, they're making pot roast on the second floor. And re-enter the apartment through the door on the 4th floor. It was a duplex in the sense that a fire escape is a balcony. The apartment on the 4th and 5th floor of this building was a walk-up, which was one of those early New York vocabulary terms I prided myself on knowing. I knew what I was doing in this new place. I wore walk-up like a Yankees cap. Why would anyone think I had just arrived in the city with slippery shoes when I could use the term walk up correctly in a sentence? Such a sentence that might include the word walk up, for example, would be, my mover expired on the way up to my 5th floor walk up. Ann's family in Tennessee had supplied the mover as a kind of graduation gift. He'd driven from Tennessee, picked up our boxes and bed frames in Charlottesville, and headed to New York, without previous experience in the city. He was a large man who had presumably lived well. His physique was suitable for elevator work. Anne lived in a tidy apartment with an elevator. I did not. I also had a great number of book boxes. Each time our mover hoisted a box onto his hip to make the climb, I thought it might be his last ascent. I was half his age and a third of his weight, and I was exhausted by the climb. I raced to carry as many book boxes as I could in order to lighten his load and not press the cardiovascular fates. Fortunately, he rested every couple of trips with a smoke break on the 71st Street sidewalk so I could get my laps in. I realize that my imagination runs wild now in apartment hunting as an adult because I had some grist from my past experience in my first apartment. Our landlord on 71st Street was a mess. He still is, apparently. I checked his Yelp reviews, which are a stew of outrage and hate posting. The tone of each sounded familiar to my recollection, hopeless pleading from tenants who could only vent, while somewhere the landlord picked the hoagie out of his scattershot teeth. When I lived under his reign of indifference, he never fixed our clogged shower drain, which achieved a kind of miracle of physics, or maybe it was engineering. The water in the shower would drain just enough to allow a single medium-duration shower of new water before overflowing out into the bathroom floor. But the shower water never drained so much that there was not always a reservoir of cold standing water you had to endure in order to take your shower. That meant I started the day easing my ankles into cold, gray, antique water. I believe that's known as the shower with Kigaw. Notebook number 4, 1991. We have to unplug the light to run the vacuum, so we do a lot of our vacuuming in the dark. Apparently, the electricity wasn't too keen in the apartment either. I'm just shocked that we were vacuuming at all, and I wondered if I wrote that just for the joke and that it wasn't really an accurate reflection of my reality. In the summer of 2021, when we arrived at the Orange Carpet House to look at it for the first time, another couple of prospective renters was on their way out. We hadn't even seen the place, but fell in love with it immediately purely out of competitive fervor. Sure enough, they made a bid with exfoliating speed. Oh no, what could we do? Then, we learned they'd made their offer conditional on removing the orange carpet. This impelled us to love the carpet. We love the carpet now, so I'm an unreliable narrator. But this sense of competition may have impelled us to love the carpet even more. We also had a friend who is our real estate agent who knew how to manage things, kind of the exact opposite of those people who push your mother down the stairs. We secured the apartment, and now you see why the carpet is so strong in my memory. One of the two things I associate with the move-in. I am looking at that carpet all the way up here as I type this. Notebook 75, September 11th, 2021. Fritz, want something? The team of movers also loved the orange carpet in our new apartment. They were just as colorful, native New Yorkers from all the boroughs mixed with younger, recent transplants. One mover wore a fountain of locks. Another was a musician rushing to make bank and get to a gig. Several were middle-aged men with whom I achieved successful small talk about sports from the 70s and 80s. Fritz, of this notebook entry, was one of the lieutenants of the crew. He was probably my age. During a break in the action, one of his comrades asked if he wanted anything from the convenience store across the street. "Yes, a blonde with big tits," he yelled, with the same kind of gusto that they use on The Price is Right. He turned around to see Anne standing behind him. No painter's tape was red enough to match his face. I processed this memory as a part of Fritz's eulogy. I have no reason to think that Fritz is not still alive. He may, in fact, have found his blonde. But I was in the frame of eulogies the day we moved in. We moved in on September 11th, 2021, 5 days after the living room declaration. But more importantly, 20 years after the terrorist attack that took down the World Trade Center. I spent moving day in the morning, 70 blocks south of the new apartment, at the public commemoration of the attacks, which CBS covered in its entirety. I slept in a hotel in Lower Manhattan the night before, a block from where the World Trade Center had stood. The area had effectively been shut down in preparation for the solemn ceremony, so we had to get into position the day before. My coffee, my shower, my shave that morning took place at the exact moment when, 20 years earlier to the second, some number of the 2,749 victims had their last coffee, their last shower, their last shave. The week before, I'd worked on a Sunday morning piece on Richard Drew, the photographer who took the famous falling man photograph on the day of the attack. Writing a piece, you stare at the component parts of the story, much as I've stared at these notebook entries. I had looked and looked at that photograph of a single man falling from the tower. It wasn't the only picture that Drew had taken. He'd taken a number of pictures of people who had jumped or fallen. A man contacted him shortly after the attack because he thought his fiancée might have been one of the ones that Drew had captured. The two men sat together, scrolling before the computer screen through the photographs of the jumpers to see if it was so. They found her. 20 years earlier, had she been thinking about wedding plans that morning?
Esposito.
Ruben Esquilin Jr.
Sadie at
Barbara G.
CBS carried the 3-hour event live. The name of each victim was read after a bell was rung. Family members periodically spoke about the firemen, accountants, policemen, and women who had died that day.
And my uncle, Łukasz Tomasz Milewski, who I never met, but I miss very dearly. My mom always talks about how much of an amazing brother you were. We were so sad you had to go so soon and so young, but I'll love you forever, and you'll never be forgotten.
They replayed antics from the lives of the deceased and testified to how much children, now grown, looked like those who had passed. 3,000 children lost parents that day. More than 100 were born after their parent died in the attack. If you've ever read an author with a strong voice, you know how that voice inhabits you after you put the book down. That voice narrates your movements throughout the day. You hear speech as dialogue. After the ceremony concluded, I had this kind of tattoo from the stream of eulogies. When I took note of a person I passed, I saw the details about them as if it was in their eulogy. It was kind of like that imaginative flood that takes place when you drive on a rural road just after it's gotten dark, and you pass houses with the lights on, and you narrate all that might be happening or has happened in that house through the opening of that light in the windows. By the time I made it uptown to the apartment, Fritz was the first person I met on the crew. As I opened the door, he directed a pack of men, a knot of eulogies, shouldering our mattress up the first flight of orange stairs. I carried my box with the red X, which I had retrieved from the other apartment, and carried the notebooks to the top floor. I had no specific plan. I probably would have put the box of notebooks at the top of the closet as I had after other moves, opening it every month or so to slip in a notebook full of writing before putting a fresh one in my back pocket. But I opened the box, and I looked at one of the notebooks. And that is why we are here. I mentioned in an earlier episode that it would seem pat if I said right up front that the anniversary of 9/11 caused me to look back at these notebooks. But I think that's pretty much the reason. Or is that the reason? If this podcast is a study of inklings, this is one worth looking at. Isaac Asimov said the true sound of scientific discovery is not eureka, which is what I think Archimedes is supposed to have said when he developed the cell phone. The true sound, Asimov said, is, huh. You're not hit by a bolt, but a little inkling, a little nudge, and then you follow up on that. And I think that's what happened here. It's tempting to say now that we've built an entire treehouse on the sprig of that first decision to look at the notebooks, that I was obviously looking at my past in the light of my mortality, given what I had done that morning, and that I was wearing eulogy glasses. You can't carry a box full of your collected life up 4 flights of stairs on 9/11 without being hit by some math. How much of the weight in my hands was from notebooks filled with activities over the 20 previous years? The years that all those people I'd been thinking about in the morning had missed. All the imagining I'd been doing about what they had missed, what their living rooms looked like now, the places left open in lives and families. And yet, as much as this timing seems to clearly explain my motivations, the truth is murkier. Did 9/11 directly spur me to embark on this notebook retrospective? Or was it more of an ambient factor, coloring but not fully catalyzing my actions? The human mind is a way of imposing tidy narratives on the messy origins of our choices. Perhaps it's not as simple as saying 9/11 made me do it. I had this thought, I'm sure I did, but I don't think that's why we're here, because that day I was overtaken by the pull of all those other lives in the world, not my own. More likely, it was a confluence of factors, the weight of those memorialized lives. Also, maybe the transition marked by our move, the feel of the unearthed notebooks in my hands after being sealed away. Any one of those alone might not have pushed me to begin this, but together they put some kind of soup on the stove. I think it's more likely that the first entry 30 years ago was written with mortality in mind. A desire to leave something, maybe, or to be a person who took note of and created things worth leaving. But I did start this process after that day and in that frame of mind. I'll address the precise moment I started, put the first notebook in my back pocket on MacArthur Boulevard, later in more detail. But for now, of the 2 things that remind me of my first impressions of this apartment, the orange carpet and the eulogies, it's the orange carpet, the more mundane thing that stirs more associative patterns in the brain. The carpet is both the stark early peak detail in this place, and it is now my daily companion as I follow up on that nudge to open the notebook box early in the first cup of coffee in this place. Bedroom doors closed, just me and the sirens and the clicks of the keyboard, a bushel of crab claws rushing over the tiles of a bathroom floor. Up here, I pick out memories, or put them in. I haven't forgotten that what I'm remembering might be what I now create. I'm also laying down new memories, the foodstuff of later looking back on the hours of work put into making something of this that might be useful. The this I'm referring to could be either the notebooks or life. You take your pick. It hasn't all been navel-gazing up here in the Garret, where in some earlier incarnation of the house they stuffed the children who spoke before they were spoken to. Up here, I lifted my head during COVID to appear on television, the back wall arranged so that viewers would have a pleasing tableau. Zoom calls up here. Oh, Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. Endless GabFest episodes. Hundreds of times I've evaluated what kind of a day it might be through the one window when the sun finally comes up. Have you ever had the experience of revisiting a place from your past after many years away? I visited the house I was brought home to after my birth, and my response to the house was synthetic. But when I walked outside, still green in my memory, I discovered, was the summer light in the trees. It was a revelation, an actual eureka, Archimedes running through the street kind of moment. I realized that it was the first place I learned about that kind of light, the particular kind of light, the way it illuminates trees at dusk in summer. That reminded me that it was there that I learned about Christmas time light too, the darkness that hits so early in the day. Heat lightning, the way it takes silent pictures of the trees at night. I learned that there too. Wait, this is a damn eulogy. It's a pre-written eulogy given by the person himself, a eulogy of retrospective fervor. The eulogies at 9/11, at the commemoration, were full of little details of life. The details opened a route for the audience. We imagined forward and backward in time the lives of those who were gone. The entry point was the small details, the little things that could have gone down in a notebook. Life understood through pinholes. But this Garret, where these associations are taking root in the fibers of the orange carpet, only means something to me. Although now we're all in the soup together now that I've barked into this podcast microphone. Still, I wonder if as humans we leave a trail of waypoints connected to our interior eulogy. Is that a thing, interior eulogy? Did I just make that up? What I mean is, are there scattered details, shards of places, flecks of where we have been, that would otherwise be of no particular note, but that nevertheless have a deep gravitational pull in our memory, a black hole gravitational pull created by our intimate experiences with those little hooks? Could you catalog those little hooks by intention? With this filter, I find a new stockroom in my hectic mind of places. That same house with the summer light, it had a door. Inside my closet in the bedroom, it was a little door, an access door to a valve of some sort. It's the kind of door you need to know about when the basement is flooding and you need to shut something off. I drew on the white painted inside of that door when I was probably 8 or so. Also in this category, a desk in my brother's room where I programmed my Atari 800 through the night. The bathroom where I put in contacts for the first time, rooting around in my eye to make them stick. The desk in the stacks at college. In episode 4, the episode devoted to the number 1016, I tricked myself into becoming a ferocious noticer in the moment. Is that possible to do in reverse? Reverse detail looking for those moments that spring out of small details. Because that little tour I just took, my brother's desk, the door, the stacks, it excavated things, took me places, my first marathons of solitary work, the quirky thresholds of adulthood. And I wonder what that process about the past will do to me now as a noticer in the present. I remember travel photography advice. Capture images of small details rather than sweeping vistas. A particular stone in the pyramid, not the big thing. In the detail, you'll have a richer recollection. I returned to my first room in New York recently when my father-in-law died, and I wrote a eulogy for him. Because that walk-in closet apartment had no space, there was nowhere to put all my books. Leonard McKeon of Knoxville, Tennessee, Anne's dad, offered to travel to Manhattan to build the bookshelves over the hollow core door I propped on 2 filing cabinets and used as a desk. He brought the wood from Tennessee, his saws, 2 boxes of tools. We hauled it all up 4 floors with no elevator in August. It was a steamy treat. Anne and I had only been dating for a year, and frankly, I would not have done this for some shabby boyfriend we warn our kids about. But Leonard was a great and generous man. He did not blanch when he saw the room. He shimmied into the bathroom when necessary. He worked the whole day long, sawing and nailing and sweating in August because air conditioning was for people with prospects in life who could afford that kind of thing. All the while, he showed no evidence that as he arranged the planks in that limiting space, he might be trying to come up with the right words to speak to his daughter, to ask her whether she really knew what she'd gotten herself into. Moving in new spaces are about physical surroundings, but those shifts in life create an inward motion. First, through imagination and then experience, we integrate a new space and the details about it into our sense of who we are. When Leonard left that room on 71st Street, he had transformed that dingy space into the place where a fellow he'd only known a year could have his books all around him. The thing that would make him feel less lonesome in a new city. We're all born with a father. We're blessed to get another one, whether we deserve it or not. The last gift of that day of Leonard's construction is the memory installed in that place, which came back to me through the long looking at detail, which you do when you write a eulogy about a person, and which I'm now doing as a part of this project. This project, which has become inseparable from the orange carpet and the Garret, by whatever process I've been trying to uncover in our discussion here. The seasoning and tanning that takes place in a space through experience, through life. Boy, did I not know what I was getting into when I wrote Notebooks to Garret. Climbing those tiny, narrow, flaming stairs with that box on September 11th, 2021, taking the sharp turn on the 2 middle stairs before I became practiced at doing so, started just as the completion of a to-do list item. Now it's a damn journey, not just to a new physical space, but an entry point to the interior life. Life of the past, yes. But as I look around at the items up here in the Garret, with this new spyglass for personal spaces, something starts in this familiar space that's close to the wild imagination that fires up upon entering a new apartment for the first time, when you're in that hunt looking to rent one. Items up here are seen in a new light: the bulletin boards, the notes for stories taped on the wall, the replica of the Georgia O'Keeffe painting from that long looking session, a framed poster labeled My Life in Weeks with boxes filled in for those I've completed and empty boxes for those, I hope, to complete. So is the Garret a place or a way of thinking in a place that I've just attached to this orange carpeted hothouse of personal stewing? Do we all have a Garret? Do we need a Garret? Do we distribute our sense of self through new spaces each time we move? Just like we do the boxes and old totems. I'm not quite done with this idea, or the notebooks, of course, but I should get done with this episode before it eats its tail. Where are you now as you listen to it? Look around. Plant a memory for 20 years hence. Until then, wishing you well from my Garret to yours. Thank you all so much for your notes and thoughts that you send me. I'll have more to say about them in the last episode, but here is a beautiful little vignette from Win Thurlow.
Many years ago, when I was in college, I studied in Florence, Italy. My classmates were all placed with host families in town. I, on the other hand, lived with Signora Francalanci, a widow who owned a home on a hillside several miles from the city, overlooking Florence's famous red roofs and the Duomo. It was magical. Each afternoon, I'd take the 29A bus to the end of the line and walk a half mile along a quiet walled road to her house. One day, convinced I was alone, I started singing aloud, Funiculi, funicula. Lost in thought and song, I failed to notice the iron gate and sign that read Casa di Cura. Beyond the gate was a large home with a sweeping lawn. On it were a dozen or so people, some dressed in robes and pajamas, all looking like something from a Fellini film. I was embarrassed, but they smiled at me in a way that suggested that singing aloud while walking alone was perfectly normal. Later that afternoon, I asked Mrs. Francalanci about the place. She explained that it was a private home for people with nervous minds. Some sort of psychiatric hospital, I supposed. I mention this because I occasionally think about the residents of the Casa di Cura and the wonderfully welcoming expressions on their faces. They likely assumed that I was a fellow patient who had wandered off the grounds and who'd be picked up by the staff and brought back. But more importantly, they viewed my singing, alone, aloud, and off-key, as the most natural thing in the world. They accepted me as a fellow traveler on this life's journey. Really, is there possibly a better feeling? I can't help you, but I can hear you and hold you. Thanks for reminding me of that. Best and keep it up, Win Thurlow.
That's it for this episode 7 of Navel Gazing, or as the Tribbles call it. In the next episode, episode 8, as we've come to call it, you'll experience the mishmash of experience as life came rolling back to me and my reacquaintance with the pages in these notebooks under the sloped ceilings of the Garret. It's the montage of discoveries episode that we've all been waiting for. I've really benefited from your notes, so please write to navelgazingpodcast@gmail.com, particularly if this episode kicks up memories about a meaningful place from your past, literally or in your mind. Does that intensity of place recognition make sense to you, or have I piffled? I'd love to hear from you at navelgazingpodcast@gmail.com. Navel Gazing is produced by Cheyna Roth. Alicia Montgomery is Vice President of Audio at Slate. Our theme music is by the band Plastic Mary. I'm John Dickerson. Talk to you next week.